welcome to the most morbid conversation for today. Um, in 2014, we had 214 out of 218 coal blocks that were already allotted to some of India's largest companies. 2014, so back in 2014, 214 of the 218 were cancelled. Companies like Hindalco, Jindal, Tata, etc. had to take billions of dollars of write-offs. And we had situations where mines and factories were literally abandoned and left. In 2018, we had RBI that essentially banned the crypto industry. We had huge shutdowns, ZepPay, Coinex, etc. The rest migrated to Dubai and so on and so forth. Only for the Supreme Court to come back later and overturn those bans to say that, hey, you can continue. In 2025, very recently, the industry that I represent, the online money games got banned over a span of 3 days by an act of parliament. A $3 billion industry, one that created about 2 lakh jobs, one that contributed 20,000 crores to the exchequer, was all shut down on essentially 3 days' notice. Now, why am I telling you all this? Why am I so morbid? Right, as my topic introduction says, regulation is the biggest risk on your alphas. It doesn't matter whether you're a startup, whether you're, 5 employees or 50 or 500 or 5,000. Doesn't matter what you're doing. The biggest risk on what could go wrong with you is on the regulatory and on the policy front. And let me explain. And here, I'm not trying to belittle any of the functions you all are currently involved with. Right? If there's a sales failure, you make $90 instead of $100. You make 80. Right? If there's an HR failure, there is perhaps some suboptimal talent that comes through, which then you need to figure out and get rid of them at some point. If there's a tech failure, your go-to-market is delayed by a month or 2 or what have you. However, if there's a policy failure, it is literally an existential risk to your industry, to your company, as in the examples that I've just given you. Right? Take large organizations like Facebook, now Meta, as an example. Like most other startups, they focused on the investors, the product, and the consumer. That's all that Meta focused on, and I'm guessing these 3 are the stakeholders that each of you are engaging with today, each of you is focusing on. But guess what? Congressional hearings happened, questions around privacy were raised, questions around addictions were raised, etc. Till it got to a stage where Meta literally had to hire Nick Clegg to head their policy function. For those of you who don't remember Nick Clegg, he was the former Deputy Prime Minister of Great Britain, of UK. And that's the kind of repair energy or repair effort it takes if you don't get policy right. Right? Why does this happen? Right. We are here at this AI event. People are talking about agentic AI, the future, technologies, consumer interface, creativity, etc. Why am I here talking about a boring topic like policy, regulation, government, etc. You see, innovation and policy work at very, very different paces. Right? Within the world of any emerging sector, you are rewarded for how quickly you move. Within governments, you are penalized if you move too quickly. Why? Because there is a large segment of stakeholders that you need to engage with. Right? Imagine it in this sense, right? Each of you are running a company. You're on skates, right? You pivot as soon as there is a need. You adapt to a new model that comes out. You absorb a new technology. You push it out quickly, etc. So you're on skates. The government is a ship, right? Imagine how long it takes for you to spin if you're on skates versus how long it takes for you to turn if you're a ship, right? What therefore happens because of this difference in pace and difference in stakeholders is, there's a huge chance on what eventually happens on the policy or the regulatory front with your industry. And all of us have heard of the examples in telecom, in coal, in crypto, in gaming, in banking, where companies have gotten destroyed overnight because of changes in policies, changes in regulation, right? If you're lucky, regulations end up enabling your future. However, if you're unlucky, regulations destroy three I's. They destroy industries, they destroy investor confidence, and they destroy innovation. The intention is never for regulations to be negative. The intention is always to protect somebody else by hurting someone else. And I think it's very important for all of you collectively as an AI community to figure out what is it that is coming to hit you in the future and where that is coming from. Why is a particular action being taken, right? Most prohibitive policies come from one single concern, absolutely single concern, which is protecting the interest of a citizen, protecting the interest of a consumer, protecting social order, etc., 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 right? Nobody wants to see, forget governments, right? I'm a father. I don't want to see my son getting cyberbullied. I don't want to see deepfakes of my daughter floating around, right? I don't want my own privacy to be breached. I don't want to create a situation where my financial information is floating out there. Everything that is happening in this room right now and within the larger AI community creates a risk for each of these 3 or 4 things that I've mentioned to you, right? The industry I come from, take gaming as an example, and here I'd like to talk about the broader gaming industry, right? Very, very, very few operators built mechanisms for KYCs, for geofencing, for age gating, right? For protection from cyberbullying and doxing and so on and so forth. All of my members did, and that was, I think, the USP for us. But then there's a very long tail of gaming operators that really didn't bother about creating trusted and safer environments for users to engage with. And the story you all know is it ended the way it did, right? By the time these trust frameworks matured, and EGF was the first federation to even introduce trust frameworks, by the time the frameworks matured, the narrative had already shifted, right? What could have been purely a regulated environment with guardrails and boundaries ended up in a prohibition. As I mentioned, loss of value, loss of jobs, the market shifting overseas, a whole bunch of things happened, right? So my singular message to you from our own failures is that you need to embed trust very, very early in your systems. And where do you need to embed trust, right? You need to embed trust within the legal framework or the legal fraternity under which you operate, under which we all operate. And which is why I'm here telling you, in fact, as my topic is also called, which is why each of you needs a seat on the table as the guardrails and boundaries, what you are allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, etc., to put it simply. As somebody sits somewhere deciding what those guardrails are, what those regulations are, you all need a seat on the table, right? You also need a sense of realism and empathy to understand how these policies get made and by who. Imagine you're a member of parliament. You're getting calls from your constituency about a street lamp that is not working, some violence that is happening, etc., etc., etc. There is party politics you need to deal with. There is media you need to deal with. And therefore, there is no way that you could be, let's say, aware enough about emerging technologies, about research, about a bunch of things that we assume that political leadership is aware of, right? So my message to you all today is, if as a community you don't want to end up like where the other industries did, you have to partner with policymakers. You have to engage with them. You have to educate them. You have to empower them with information that allows them to take rational decisions rather than emotional decisions or decisions driven by electoral politics. How do you engage with them, or why would they engage with you? At the end of the day, there are only 3 hooks that any community, especially an emerging community, which is the AI community, can engage with. There's user safety, there's economic value, and the mega story that works today about putting India on the map out there, right? I would strongly urge you to start engaging with policymakers using any of these 3 hooks and get them to be your partners, get them to champion for your industry. Because otherwise, you don't have the fuel which your competitors in other nations have. And worst case, you don't want a hammer coming down your head at some point, right? You have to engage, you have to earn trust. Trust is the only currency. You have to earn it. Trust, as we all know in our personal lives, is also a very fickle currency. It's very easy to lose trust. You can spend a decade building trust, one bad experience, one breach, and it's gone forever, right? As you all focus on the next big thing, the next big technology, I want to leave you all with a challenge, right? How can your sector collectively build trust frameworks which then enables regulation, which then allows or encourages regulation to become an enabler rather than a prohibitor, right? And why am I the guy to tell you this, right? Apart from working in the policy space, etc., for a while. We've just learned from the experiences of gaming, right? So here I am, standard as a wounded soldier, telling you all where we messed up, right? And AI also has very strong parallels with gaming, right? So please be very, very aware. Whatever happened with gaming could very easily happen with you all. Why? There's the same concerns around addictions, around fraud, around misuse, around privacy. And these are things that the government has said very publicly, to media channels, in speeches, in the parliament, etc., right? All these do play very heavily on an average person's mind, and a government cannot ignore an average person's mind to meet an individual community's need, right? Interestingly, also the same antidotes that work there work for you all as well, right? What you all need to do, and when I say all, I literally mean people sitting in the back row on WhatsApp messages right now, and those of you who thankfully are paying attention, right? You all need to come together and embed them in your systems and embed them also in your psyches, right? You have to put it up in center. Otherwise, be ready for the existential risk, being a reality at some stage. As much as you hate engaging with boring governments and policymakers and bureaucrats and all of that, honestly, you have no other option. Many other industries have learned it the hard way. I hope the AI industry does not. Why? Because, as a nation, we lost out on the hardware wave, we lost out on the software wave, the enterprise solution wave, we lost out on the social media wave. We end up going on American social media platforms and whining about the fact that India doesn't have its own social media platforms, right? I don't think I've seen a bigger irony than that. The only thing that helps us leapfrog into the future is the next wave of technology, right? And Bharat really has a huge opportunity today, right? I mean, it's a macro view for each of you running your companies or roles in certain companies. You might be out there looking for a job, et cetera, et cetera. But at some point, I think we all have to pan out and look at the opportunity that is there collectively for us as a nation, a derivative of that being the opportunity you have as an individual, you have as an individual, et cetera, right? India has scale. We have scale of talent, we have scale of energy, and we have the scale of market size here, right? We have speed, right? I've spent my life in, of course, in India, then the US and Europe and Singapore and all over. I don't think nobody is in a hurry the way Indians are, right? Before the concept of fast food existed anywhere, Desis had a version of Sandarshinis, as you see here. Before, before delivery existed anywhere in the world, we had our local grocer sending us, 100 grams of sugar, 200 grams of tea, which now has converted into fast commerce and so on and so forth, right? Finally, at the risk of being a little facetious, I think we have the sexiness in India, right? The biggest S of it all, the scale, speed, and sexiness. And why do I say sexiness here, right? We have panache. As a civilization, we have panache. We are the land of Rajnikant, right? No parallel can exist anywhere. We are the land that has, 5, 8, 10,000 years of collective wisdom, of collective stories, of culture, et cetera, right? We have that kind of knowledge pool to borrow from, right? And think of where we've come as a nation, right? We've survived poverty, we've survived, we've survived a partition, we've survived colonialism, we've survived communism, we've survived all these things, right? And all these things end up building resilience, which we may not recognize actively, but it exists somewhere subconsciously in our mind. The question is, how do you sitting here turn all this to an advantage? How do you turn this, how do you swing this into your favor, right? My closing message with you, it begins with you. If you say engaging with policymakers is not my job, then please know it is nobody's job. If it's not your job, it's nobody's job. You need to partner with the government. You need to embed ethics. You need to build trust and safety mechanisms that government could later formalize. You need to educate users, right? Unless you do that, all these things would mean building huge companies, huge infrastructures, huge valuations, and finally putting all of them at risk till one fine day it goes all down the drain. Now, without sounding morbid, I therefore request you to learn from our learnings, from the learnings of other industries, tech, telecom, commodity industries like steel, sugar, coal, et cetera, and figure out how you find your seat on the table, how you ensure that regulations don't police you, but regulations encourage you to build your future, right? So my message to you all, escape prohibitive regulation, look for regulation as an enabler. You know where to reach me. I'm on LinkedIn. If I can help the process, happy to. And let me end with best of luck. I think the nation is depending on this community here for us to leapfrog into the Vikasit Bharat that we deserve to be. So thank you all so much for your time.